Hello serverless people, welcome to another episode of the AWS Solutions Architect Associate exam. In this video we'll explain the EC2 concepts that you need to understand. I'm going to present this cheat sheet that I made for the exam, and also on the second part I'm going to answer a few questions that are taken from the actual AWS exam. So stay tuned if you want to see how an exam is actually made of. So let's start with basic concepts. What is an EC2 instance and why you need it? You can think about like an EC2 instance as a virtual machine hosted in AWS. So you don't need anymore to host virtual machine in your own local cloud environment, but they are available on AWS. You can select the capacity, the instance family. You have a pricing pay as you go, so you pay by the minute, or actually you also can pay by the seconds depending on the instance, and they are available in minutes and not month. So if you need to allocate new instance, they are ready to use. I suggested to, before doing the actual exam, to go through the creation of an EC2 instance on the AWS console, because you can learn a lot of concepts and you have to be familiar with how to create an instance. So you know the different steps and different features that you need to configure in order to have an EC2 instance up and running. So if you go through the process of creating an EC2 instance, you will see on the last tab that AWS will share with you access key and secret. Remember that the secret is shown only once. So if you lose it, you need to generate again the credentials from scratch, and the previous one will be deleted, so they will not be valid anymore. And they always create the credentials in a pair, so you're gonna be key and secret. You cannot create the secret based on the key. And remember that also the best practice is that each developer should have their own key pair for the EC2 instance. Another concept we need to understand is what is a security group. So you can think of security groups as virtual firewalls for EC2 instance, and by default, remember that everything is blocked. So the main features of the security groups is that every change you made to the security group takes effect instantly. So I remember a lot of questions on the exam asking you when the changes on the security groups takes effect. Remember that it's an instant effect. You can attach a max of 5 security groups per instance. And remember that security groups are stateful. If you send a request from your instance, the response traffic for that request is allowed to flow in regardless of the inbound rules. Remember that because there is always the confusion between security groups and network accesses, which are like stateless. Remember that security groups are stateful. Another big topic will be tested on the exam is the how to use the IAM roles with EC2. If you need like an introduction on the IAM service, I made a video about it. So IAM roles, remember that you always want to prefer attaching roles to an instance, so you can attach roles to an EC2 instance. It can be a running instance, a stopped instance, it doesn't matter. You can attach the role whenever you want. And remember that you want to avoid to hard coding credentials on the instance. So if you have a question asking you which is the best approach if you want to give permissions to an instance, remember that attaching a role is always preferred and is actually the best practice. As I said, roles can be attached and detached to a running instance without the need to stop or terminate the instance. And again, update to a policy attached to a role takes effect immediately. So if you change something on the policy, the effects are immediate. Now let's go to the pricing options, and you need to know these ones very well because you will be tested on the exam, especially when they ask you the most cost-effective solution. So the first one is let's say the standard one, which is on demand. So basically there are no upfront payment. It is like a low-cost option. It's a great choice for application with unpredictable workload and cannot be interrupted. So it's flexible. You can pay by the hour or seconds depending on the family of the instance, and this is usually the general purpose pricing option. Then you have the reserved instance. So let's say you know that you need a certain amount of EC2 instances or virtual machines for your company, let's say for 1 or 3 years. You can reserve capacity and get a very great discount. Of course, the more you commit to. Like I say, you commit for 3 years, the more discount, the greater is going to be the discount for you. As I said, this is a great choice if you have like a fixed and well-known requirement and you need to pay everything up front. I remember in the exam, usually they tell you there is this company who knows that they have like, a fixed requirement for like a couple of years. This is a great choice. Then there are like the spot instance. Basically, the spot instance give you access to a kind of marketplace where AWS basically gives you the possibility to bet on the price of the instance. So you can get up to 90% discount, and it's great for processes that are stateless. So you don't need to have like an application that cannot be interrupted. So let's say it's like workloads that doesn't have a state. It can be terminated or can be stopped. You will discover that on the questions. Usually it says, suppose we have a process that can be interrupted, which is the best solution in terms of cost. You remember this is the answer, spot instance. Then we have dedicated instance. We basically dedicate for you a physical server. Usually this one, you can recognize this option on the questions when they ask you to have an EC2 instance, which is good for compliance or for licensing use case. So when you have like a licensing use case, you need to use like a physical server, and then you want to go with the dedicated option. Then you need to know also that you can access view data of the instance using two main URLs. So if you want to access user data are data that contains the bootstrap script used on the initiate process of the EC2 instance. So when you create an instance on the console, there is one of the steps, I think is the second step, you can add bootstrap script. So if you want to install some software, for example, you want to install MySQL database or Docker, you can put the script, and EC2 is going to run the script on the initializing process of the EC2 instance. If you want to get the script to use, you can use this URL. So it's the IP of the instance /latest/user data. On the other hand, if you want to get data on the hostname, events, security groups, and other data, you can check that on the documentation. The URL you have to query is the metadata. So it's /latest/metadata. Remember these two URLs because they're going to ask you for this. Next step is network interface. So in this case, you need to know, all the details of the network interface. You just need to remember that ENI is for basic networking. So it's elastic network interface. Then if you need speeds with like very high throughput, you have to go with enhanced networking, and speed is between like 10 to 100 gigabit per second. When you see on the questions like high performance computing, also known as HPC, and like machine learning processes, you need to remember that you have to go with EFA. So now let's see what are placement groups. So basically when you launch a new EC2 instance, the EC2 service places the instance in like different, hardware. You don't have the power, and you cannot choose where the EC2 instance has been launched. The only way to like influence this is to use placement groups. There are different placement groups. The main ones are cluster, spread, and partition. So for the cluster ones, for the cluster family, is when you need low network latency and high network throughput, and this means that all the EC2 instances that you launch on your cluster are on the same underlying hardware. So of course there is going to be low network latency and high network throughput. The next one is spread placement group. On the spread placement group, individual instances are spread across distinct hardware. So if something happens on the hardware, it's very unlikely it's going to happen also on the other EC2 instance because they are basically on different underlying hardware. This is very useful when you need to reduce correlated failures. Then we have the partition placement group, and basically the EC2 instance are spread across different logical partitions, and this is great for large distributed and replicated workloads such as like Hadoop, Cassandra, and Kafka. So remember on the exam when you see like, especially these names like Hadoop, Cassandra, and Kafka, the partition group to go with is partition placement group. Then there is the spot fleet concept, and we said the spot instances can save you up to 90% because basically these are like very flexible EC2 instances that can be terminated by AWS without any notice. You can choose though the termination mode such as like hibernate, stop, or terminate. Just remember for this case that a spot fleet is a collection of spot instances. And now let's close the introduction of the EC2 instances and then we're gonna go through the AWS exam questions with some exam tips. Remember that when they ask you about EC2 CloudWatch metrics, the default metrics that you have on an EC2 instance are like CPU utilization, disk reads and write, network in, out. When they ask you about accessing memory metrics, these are not available by default. You need to configure that as custom metrics. So remember that memory metrics are custom metrics basically. Always remember that attaching roles to EC2 instances is the best approach always. So if you see attaching role, that's the answer you want to go with. And then get familiar, as I said on the beginning, with the steps needed to create an EC2 instance from scratch on AWS. So really just log into your profile, log into your console, try to launch an EC2 instance and try to connect through SSH. Alright, now it's time to have some fun with the EC2 questions. I got these questions from a sample exam that I found online. There's gonna be 10 questions, so follow along with me. This is gonna be a very useful exercise and you're gonna see how I resonate when I had to choose an answer. So let's start with the first one. Your company is using hybrid configuration because there are some legacy applications which are not easily converted and migrated to AWS. You are attempting to convert the application to the cloud, have configured an EC2 instance to house the application. You are currently testing the removal of ENI, so here we're speaking about Elastic Network Interface, from the legacy instance and attaching it to EC2 instance. You want to temp a warm attach. Okay, so here we need to remember what is a warm attach. We have to remember that exists warm, hot, and cold attach. What does it mean? So here there is no way you need to learn these concepts. The warm attach is when the instance is stopped. If we go back on my cheat sheet here, we go here and warm is when instance has stopped. Let's go back on the exam and the answer is the C. So attach the ENI to an instance when it's stopped. Remember these three concepts. So warm is when it's stopped, hot is when it's running, and cold is when it's being launched. Anyway, I forgot to tell that I'm gonna attach the cheat sheet on my Twitter account, so feel free to download it. It's for free, I'm not gonna charge anything. Second question, so you have several instances in the company AWS environment. You want to quickly retrieve data about the instances such as instance ID, public keys, and public IP address. A URL command can be used to do this. What can you append to the URL /latest/ to retrieve this data? Okay, so here we have seen that before on the cheat sheet. The answer is gonna be metadata. I think like those ones doesn't exist, and user data is the bootstrap script. So in this case, the answer is the metadata is gonna give us all this information. You have configured an auto-scaling group of EC2 instances front-end. You want to begin monitoring the EC2 instances using CloudWatch metrics, alright. Which metric is not readily available out of the box? Okay, so here you have to remember this is very important. The memory utilization is not available out of the box. You need to configure this metric using custom metrics on AWS CloudWatch. So the answer is B. Let's go to the next question. You have several EC2 instances in an auto-scaling group fronted by a network load balancer. The instances will need access to S3 and DynamoDB. Okay. The auto-scaling group was created from a launch template. What needs to be configured in the launch template to enable newly launched instances access to S3 and DynamoDB? Okay, so here we need to check for an IAM role. So an IAM role attached to the newly launched instances with permission to S3 and DynamoDB. I like this answer, so I'm gonna highlight this one for now. IAM policy attached to, okay, it's not possible to attach policies to an instance. An IAM group is not possible to attach group either. Groups, you can add users to group, but you cannot attach groups to EC2. Access key to be passed to the new, okay, access key usually is not a good practice, so I'm gonna stick with my answer, which is gonna be the A, so attach an IAM role to the instances. Good, let's go to the next one. You are a consultant hired by a small company to configure an AWS environment. You begin to work with the VPC and launching EC2 instances within the VPC. Alright. The initial instances will be placed in a public subnet. Then you begin to create a security group. How many security groups can be attached to an EC2 instance? Okay, so here is up to 5. So you can assign 2 security groups, this is not. You can assign only 1 security group, no. You can assign up to 5 security groups to an instance, that's the right answer. Instances in private subnet this is not true. So the answer is C. Let's go to the next one. You have just deployed an application to an EC2 instance. You notice that no one is able to connect to the web application from a browser, but you can SSH into the EC2 instance to perform a small update. But you also cannot browse to the application from Google Chrome. Okay. You have checked and there is an internet gateway attached to the VPC and a route in the route table to the internet gateway. Which situation most likely exists? So the instance security group has ingress on port 80 but not port 22. So let's remember that SSH run on port 22 and being able to connect to the web application can be either port 80 or 443. So the instance security group has an ingress port 80, so this is not true because I can connect with SSH. The instance group has ingress on port 22 but not port 80. This yes could be a good one. The instance security group has ingress on port 443 but not port 22. This is not true because I have access to SSH. And the instance security group has no ingress on port 22 or port 80. No. So the only correct answer is this one. So I can access the instance on port 22 because I can SSH into it but not port 80. So in this case the next step would be to add a new rule and give access to port 80. So next question is, a software company is looking for compute capacity in the cloud for a fault-tolerant and flexible application. Okay, the application is not mission critical, so occasional downtime is acceptable. Okay, this is very important. Occasional downtime is acceptable. What type of EC2 servers can be used to meet these requirements at the lowest cost? This is again another important tip, lowest cost. So in this case, since downtime is acceptable and we need lowest cost, the answer is Spot, the Spot family. The Spot is not a family, actually, it's the pricing option. Remember to go through my EC2 cheat sheet. I have all the description for the 4 pricing options, but in this case, the option is Spot instance. Perfect. Let's move to the next one. We only have left 3 questions. There is an application running in EU West 2 that requires 8 EC2 instances always running. Given that EU West 2 has 3 availability zones, which of the following deployments provides fault tolerance if one availability zone in the region becomes unavailable? Okay, this is very likely you're gonna get a question like this, so now I'm gonna tell you a method to be sure about the answer. So we need to have always 8 EC2 instances running, and we need to have fault tolerance if one availability zone becomes unavailable. So the process to tackle those questions is to really go through a very basic reasoning. So let's go for the first answer. 4 in EU West 2A, 4 in EU West 2B, and 4 in EU West 2C. So let's try with a very simple method and try to think about what happens if each of the 3 regions becomes unavailable. So if this each of the availability zone becomes unavailable. So if this one becomes unavailable, I have still 8 instances running. If this one, I still have 8 because I have one on 2A and 2C. And same thing for this one because I'm going to have 4 here and 4 here, 8. So this is for sure a correct answer. Let's go on to the next one then. So we have 5 in 2A, 3 in 2B, and 2 in 2C. So what happens if this becomes unavailable? I will only have 5 EC2 instances running, so this is not an answer. Let's try now the next one. So it's 2 in 2A, 4 in 2B, and 4 in 2C. So if this one becomes unavailable, I have 8 running. If this one becomes unavailable, I only have 4 plus 2, so 6. And same thing if this one becomes unavailable. So this is not a correct answer. Let's try now this one. So 4 in 2A, 4 in 2B, and 0 in 2C. So if this one becomes unavailable, I'm gonna have 4. And we already know this is not a correct answer. Let's try now the last one, which I suppose is gonna be correct. So I have 6 in 2A, 6 in 2B, and 2 in 2C. So if this one becomes unavailable, I'm gonna have 8 instances running. So that's perfect. If this one becomes unavailable, I'm gonna have 2 plus 6, 8, which is great again. And this one, if this one becomes unavailable, I'm gonna have 6 plus 6, which is 12 instances. So this is the other correct option. As you see, if you're not comfortable with the answers, just go through this process. Try to see what happens when each of the availability zone goes down and see if there are the required number of EC2 instances needed. In this way, you're not gonna fail the question. Now let's move to the next question. So question number 9, you need to run EC2 instances to run workload in Cassandra. These workloads are large, distributed, and replicated. You want the traffic to be distributed evenly across the partitions, and each partition should contain multiple instances. Which is the best partition group for this use case? So here we know important Cassandra. So as we said before, when I was explaining, these workloads are large, distributed, and replicated, and we have to run Cassandra. You want the traffic to be distributed evenly across the partitions. So here the option is not the cluster because they're all on the same hardware. The option is the partition placement strategy. All right, and we arrived to the last question. You've been hired as an IT consultant for a finance company. Company has a consistent usage of EC2 and they predict they will use the same amount of instances for the next 3 years. The team has asked you if there is a way to save costs for the EC2 instances. So this is a very important data for the next 3 years. What do you suggest to save costs? So here, if you remember from the explanation I did before, we want to check the reserved instances. So let's see the answers. Use always spot instances because they are cheaper. This is not true for all the cases. Use standard EC2 instances. This can work, but I want to save costs. Purchase reserved instances plan, which I think this is the answer because as we said, next 3 years, we can purchase reserved instances and use a compatible reserved instance plan. So I'm gonna highlight the third option, and I think this is the correct one. Just for you to know, the convertible reserved instance plan is when you want to convert your reserved instance to another family of instances. So it can happen that they ask you what you can do if you purchase reserved instances, but you don't need it anymore. You can go to this kind of market when you can convert your reserved instances with another reserved instances on the AWS market. All right, guys, I hope this introduction to EC2 with the basic concept and also this answering questions was useful for you. Please let me know if you have more questions on the comment on this video. Please subscribe so I can do other videos like this. And if you're studying for the exam, good luck, you're gonna smash it. Thanks everyone. Remember to subscribe and see you on the next one.